Coming up, a legendary singer wrote one of rock's greatest masterpieces at the age of 14. 14! I mean, not only that, this 70s classic, it's a pretty heavy song for a 14-year-old to understand, let alone write. Then years later, he brought it to the band, and the guitarist, he didn't want to cut it because he felt it was too soft for the band's sound. Even though the song builds and then it explodes, many obstacles stood in the way of this song becoming a hit, from a run-in with a gangster who pulled a gun on the band, to failing on his first release, to the singer blowing out his vocal cords on one big performance. The story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you used to study the liner notes of the albums or the records or even the cassettes that you'd buy, or those long things you pulled out, you're going to love this channel. Make sure to subscribe below right now to get the real stories behind your favorite songs straight from the artists that created them. Also, take a look at our Patreon link for another catalog of content below that supports our mission to keep the music alive. Victor Tallarico was a concert pianist, classically trained at the Julliard School of Performing Arts in New York City. He'd often practice on a piano at home with his 3-year-old son lying on the floor under the belly of the piano, spellbound by his father playing the notes of history's greatest composers, Chopin, Bach, Beethoven, so many others. This little boy's name was Steven Tallarico, who eventually changed his name to Steven Tyler, and he grew into a pop culture icon and one of the greatest frontmen of the rock and roll era. Music was encoded in young Steven's DNA. In addition to his father's musical background, his grandmother was a music teacher. His grandfather was something of a mandolin prodigy, actually. He had a band of his own. One of Steven's great uncles, he was a singing teen idol in Naples, Italy. It's like father, like son, Steven fell in love with the keys on a piano. It was the instrument that he used to script the classic inspirational rocker, Dream On, when he was a mere 14-year-old. 14 years old. It's unbelievable. Now, Steven reflected that Dream On began as a little sonnet. He played on a beautiful antique Packard organ in white finish. He never imagined that it would turn into an actual song. I mean, after all, when Steven created Dream On, he didn't know anything about song composition. Dream On is Steven Tyler's words of wisdom and fortitude, and you have to remember that this all-time classic is from the perspective of a teenager, not a middle-aged man who is sharing the wealth of, his life experience. When you think of it in these terms, this 14-year-old wrote well above his age. I mean, he was an old soul as a teen. Had to be. Dream On is about the hunger to be somebody, with a mantra to dream until your dreams come true. How a teenager understood the importance of possessing that kind of drive and determination, truly remarkable. With passages such as the introspective opening verse, every time that I look in the mirror, all these lines on my face getting clearer. The past is gone. Every time I look in the mirror. And of course, there's Tyler's insightful second verse. Half my life's in books, written pages, lived and learned from fools and from sages. From fools and from sages. You know it's true, all the things come back to you. Wisdom, poetry, jukebox poetry from such a young guy. But we have to remember, Steven Tyler was not, your average adolescent. Even in his youth, Tyler was a fireball with huge aspirations and a huge appetite for living and partaking of stimulants and worldly pleasures, let's just say. Dream On was studio ready 4 years prior to the formation of Aerosmith in about 1970, when Steven Tyler presented the song to his bandmates, Joe Perry, Brad Whitford, Joey Kramer, and Tom Hamilton. It was only a piano piece at this point. He had no plans to transpose it to guitars, but that's exactly what happened when Joe Perry and Brad Whitford heard it. Steven played the melody on a keyboard. Joe imitated the notes Steve played on his right fingers, and Brad strummed what Steven tickled with his left hand. While Steven studied, the two guitarists were working it out. He got so emotional, it brought tears to his eyes. It was beautiful. Once Stephen's little sonnet was converted to a guitar track, the main riff of the song became a trance-like B to high E to G repeated chord pattern that was perfected in a hybrid picking style by the great Joe Perry. Perry also added power chords to the first bridge in the recording of Dream On, of course using a 68 Les Paul Gold Top. I found it interesting that for all of his indispensable contributions to the final version of Dream On, Joe Perry, he actually didn't like the song, mostly because it was a ballad and he felt the song would suck all the energy out of their concerts if they ever performed it live. It wasn't until much later, after the song became a hit and a fan favorite, that Joe Perry grew to appreciate the powerful musicality of Dream On. The first time Aerosmith played Dream On in front of a live audience, that was in the autumn of 1971 at the Shabu Inn. To perform that milestone gig, Aerosmith was paid $175 and a bottle of gin. The unveiling of Dream On to a live audience came in the aftermath of one of the craziest escapades in Aerosmith lore. And before I tell that story, I do want to mention our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, glasses I always wear. Make sure to click on the info button just right up here to get Zenni's best deals on prescription frames. This link will give you the best price. You get a brand new pair of glasses or a couple pairs to your liking for up to 80% off regular retail prices. Treat yourself today. So the infamous suitcase story from Aerosmith lore, when Steven Tyler found a suitcase in front of the building the band was living in. Inside the case were a bunch of dirty clothes, a little bit of marijuana, and $2,000 in cash. Now, Steven Tyler took the cash and he left the bag where he found it. Tyler didn't tell the guys what he'd found, and he used the money to buy the RMI keyboard that he used to perform Dream On for the first time on the stage at that gig in Mansfield. It wasn't long before the gangster that the suitcase belonged to came looking for his money, knocking on the band's door late one night with two of his thug cronies in tow. Tyler denied taking the cash, but the lead gangster didn't believe him, and he threatened the band at gunpoint, demanding that they give him his money or else. So, things look pretty grim at this point, when all of a sudden the back door crashed open and in jumped Aerosmith's friend and protector, Gary Kabasi. He was swinging a sword, of all things, going right after the band's would-be assailants. As Joe Perry tells it, Kabasi, with a pistol in his face, brazenly told the thugs that the cops were on their way, and if they shot him, they'd better kill him, or he was going to be on them like stink on crap, is what he said. The gangsters backed down, and they left without firing a shot. Years after that hairy altercation, Kabasi learned that Steven Tyler actually did swipe the money from the suitcase. It left him a bit stunned that he'd risked his life for his friends that he thought were unjustly accused by these guys. Perry also added that Steven Tyler has always been a bit of a klepto. The band once lost a decent paying gig back in the early days because the club caught him stealing a slide projector of all things. So when Dream On was recorded after Aerosmith inked a deal with Columbia Records, a captivating rhythm section delivered by Joey Kramer's drumming and of course Tom Hamilton's bass line, that was added, along with a tasty interplay between the guitar work of Perry and Brad Whitford. Recording Dream On for Aerosmith's debut LP was truly a team effort. The simulated string arrangement of Dream On was actually produced by a combination of keyboard depression and sampling on a mellotron that was played by Steven Tyler on the intro and the interludes. Steven Tyler, for those who aren't unaware, he's a very skilled pianist, guitarist, and a drummer, which is pretty amazing that he can play all those instruments. Steven also played the harpsichord on Dream On, giving the track a haunting, dissonant effect that accents the guitar sequence. Now, the implementation of a harpsichord, that was an elegant touch that really reflected Steven Tyler's upbringing with the harmonics of classical music. Dream On finishes with a resounding gong and a pulsating siren guitar effect on the fade-out, as if the narrator gradually awakes from a dream. And stuck with the realization that it's time to put that dream into action. Yes, Dream On is a ballad. But the palpitating sonic buildup and the climactic explosion of Tyler's convulsive wailing makes Dream On a thunderous rock and roll invigorator. I mean, we all know Steven Tyler is the demon of screaming, but in Dream On, he gives us something really special when he shares his natural singing voice. Dream On is the only cut on Aerosmith's first LP where he sang using his real singing voice. That's why it sounds so different than anything else that Steven Tyler would sing going forward. Might be hard to believe now, but Steven Tyler was insecure about his voice, how it sounded on tape. So for the other songs, he sang in a lower octave to sound more soulful, like James Brown. In Dream On, Tyler elevates his octave range as he repeats Dream On at the end of the bridge. Dream on, dream on. Beginning at 3 minutes and 24 seconds and rises to a penetrating, sustained Steven Tyler shrill. Dream on, dream on, dream on. For that urgent climax at about 3 minutes, 33 seconds. Steven Tyler's ability to hit those incredible high notes in Dream On and beyond was developed while he was sequestered in a hotel room near Boston's Logan Airport, repeatedly playing Yma Sumac, her records. Steven loved Yma Sumac, the Inca princess with a 5-octave vocal capacity. He would sing along to her songs and practice hitting those eardrum-piercing banshee shrieks. I mean, what makes Dream On such a riveting piece of rock regalia is the contrast to Steven Tyler's big bad screams and the purity of his natural singing voice. Like I said, Steven Tyler, he sounds very different on the master recording of Dream On really than he would sound in the hits that would follow thereafter. And actually, decades later, Dream On was the song that Steven Tyler was singing on that famous high note. He actually ruptured a blood vessel in his vocal fold, and he'd have to cut the concert short and have voice surgery. A renowned doctor named Steven Zeitels would perform laser surgery, and he put Steven Tyler back on the stage for the next few decades, which the last few decades. Dream On was the first major hit for Aerosmith, actually. It was the track that rescued the band from being dropped by Columbia Records and eventually voted as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. But it was a rocky road getting to the promised land, if you will. Columbia half-heartedly promoted Aerosmith's debut LP, as it was, and they were on the verge of dumping this band from the label due to pitiful record sales. In fact, many music critics panned the album and labeled them a ripoff of the Rolling Stones. Of course, a review that infuriated Steven Tyler. Now, as a Hail Mary attempt to save the group's deal, then manager David Krebs, he convinced Columbia Brass to give Dream On a shot as a single. Although it was a smash in Aerosmith's hometown of Boston, Dream On actually stalled at number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100 on its first run as a single in '73. The song went to number 1 on WBZ in Beantown, top 5 at WRKO, and number 16 in Boston's WMEX, one of the first 2 major market radio stations, along with WPGC in Washington, D.C., to pick up American Top 40 with Casey Kasem. In spite of the single stiffing nationally, though, Dream On showed just enough promise in the Boston market that Columbia was willing to hang in there and keep Aerosmith on the label. Now, the second run of Dream On, that came in 1976, when the song really took off across America as a re-release single, shot to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's a pretty great top 10 chart that week. Had Golden Years by David Bowie. Dreamweaver by Gary Wright. Let Your Love Flow by the Bellamy Brothers, and Dream On leading the pack. Dream On also rose to number 10 in Canada and it went to number 12 in Holland. Now, Aerosmith subsequently became one of the biggest selling acts for Columbia Records in the 70s after that. And Dream On, of course, has continued to be part of our culture decades beyond that release date. It was actually sampled by Eminem on his song Sing for the Moment.
Only have one homie, only this only, cause don't need one homie.
With Joe Perry playing the guitar solo and Tyler singing on that song's chorus. It's a beloved power ballad, and like I said, it's been used in pop culture in a variety of films and TV advertising since its pinnacle chart position in '76. Just to give you an example, it was placed in the blockbusters Avatar, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Gone Girl, How to Train Your Dragon 2. There's actually the theme song for Miracle, the 2004 motion picture about the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team that shocked the world by winning the gold medal.
Every time that I look in the mirror.
So I remember back in high school, actually no, it was junior high, when Aerosmith had made their big comeback, with Run DMC and Walk This Way. And then Permanent Vacation came out with Ragdoll and Angel and Dude Look Like a Lady.
Daddy's little cutie, you're so fine. I never see you leaving by the back door. You look like a lady. Baby, you're my angel.
And, all the cute girls at our school started getting into Aerosmith. Well, as a school music geek, I'd take my Walkman and my cassettes with me everywhere. And I had a couple of 70s Aerosmith albums, including the debut. Dream On, that was a song I'd been hearing since I was a little kid. My dad had it on vinyl, and it became my favorite Aerosmith song through the years. So I was always the butt of jokes with some of the cool kids, the jock boys who'd rip on me for always carrying my tapes with me everywhere I went. And for the music that I listened to, they'd say, Reader with his grandpa music. Because I was listening to the 50s and the 60s and 70s artists along with new stuff. So one day I was sitting in the cafeteria at lunch talking to this cute girl from my class, and one of the jock boys walked up and grabbed my Walkman and headphones to make fun of me, make me look stupid in front of this girl. Well, I happened to be listening to Dream On at that very moment. So he put the headphones up to his ears, and he started laughing and said something like, a Reader in his lame old man music. Why don't you listen to something from the last 5 years at least? Why don't you ever listen to the great bands like Def Leppard or Bon Jovi or that new band Aerosmith? Instead of this wussy rock from the grandpa years. So he turns back around, gets right in my face. He's like, what do you have to say about that, nerd? I burned you. As soon as he said it, I snatched my Walkman from him. I ejected the tape, flashed it in his face, and I said, hey, smart guy, Aerosmith is not a new band. They released this album in the 70s. His face turned red, and he came back with the intelligent reaction like, nuh-uh, they just came out with Walk That Way. That was their first song ever. Of course, he screwed up the title. And they said, no, Walk This Way, that was a remake of their song that originally came out in 1975. His comeback classic, who cares, nerd? It's all wussy rock. I actually saw him at my last class reunion. He walked up to me and said something like, Reader, still a music nerd? I said, yeah, I am. And he said, well, have you ever interviewed Pamela Anderson? And I remember he had I think a 6-pack of beer, no, a 12-pack on one shoulder. And he's like, get out of my way, man. It's time to get sloppy. He brought a 12-pack to the reunion. Classy. It's funny the memories that come from music, from just hearing a song. But Dream On, it was a song that started it all for this incredible band, a career that's now past 50 years. It includes one of the greatest comebacks in history. Even clear back in the 70s, this was a band that was fighting tooth and nail. And even when Dream On failed to catch on, they just kept punching until it became a top 10 hit. Like I said in the first part of this video, Steven Tyler's inspiration for the song's chords, it was the time when he was a young boy, listening to his Julliard-trained musician father, playing the piano. Steven Tyler would say that ultimately the song is about the hunger to be somebody. Like I said earlier, he said, dream until your dreams come true. This song was the harbinger. Leave us a comment about Aerosmith and this classic hit. What are your memories of this music? What do you prefer? 70s era, Aerosmith, 80s? Share in the comments. Let's talk about it. Think about some of these Aerosmith stories. Just amazing. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. Check us out on Patreon. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.